When you entrust a man with the public trust, and you know that he's human, and you don't want him to run amok, you bind him down with an oath. I know we heard talk today about someday you may see those in the uniform, in violation of their oaths, pointing the gun at you, their masters, in an unlawful way. I pray that never happens. It has happened. I want to assure you, the man in the uniform will not be I.
Law enforcement and military are not the enemy. There's a lot of people that think, oh God, we're going to have to fight the U.S. forces, we're going to have to fight the Marines, we're going to have to fight the Army. And that's not the case. U.S. military is not against the people. We are the people.
Today, really, in many respects, our government is the one that is stepping aside the rule of law.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans.
The social controllers are very scared of police and military rediscovering their oath of office.
I will not obey orders to impose martial law.
I will not obey.
They understand that throughout history, tyranny comes to your door in a uniform.
We will not obey orders to conduct warrantless searches of the American people.
I will not obey.
Think of every instance you can think in history where republics have fallen through usurpation of power. Particularly think of the times when it has happened through the military force run amok.
You can't really tell from my name, but my father lived under Stalin, and his whole family was killed by Stalin. And my mother's family escaped from North Korea, and they lost all their property, and were supposed to be killed at least 3 or 4 times. So I was fortunate to be born in this great nation, and but yet I see the same signs or our country going in the direction in which my parents escaped from.
U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American
We
soil.
will not obey any orders to force American citizens into any form of detention camps under any pretext.
I will not obey.
To what degree are we anymore mindful of oaths?
If we had law enforcement in America keeping their oath to do just that, we would have our constitutional republic back tomorrow. That's how powerful this movement is.
I'm Garrett Lear, the Patriot Pastor.
This is where the battle was fought, right here in the Lexington Battle Green. This is sacred ground. This is one of the most important pieces of real estate in the history of America. This is where it happened, and this was the shot basically heard around the world, and still being heard around the world, I think.
I grew up in the town of Lexington, standing on the green, playing on the green. When I was a boy growing up, my mother told me about our ancestry, and so I started to go on the village green in Lexington, but didn't pay a whole lot of attention except to the statue of John Parker. Everyone could look up to him because he wasn't white, he wasn't brown, he wasn't red, he wasn't yellow, he wasn't black, he's green, actually. So anyone could identify with him, and I said, one day when I grow up, I want to be like him.
Welcome to Lexington, the cradle of American liberty.
Most people don't know really what happened at the Battle of Lexington, but basically what happened was the night before the battle, that would have been April 18th, riders came in, that's the midnight ride of Paul Revere. It was actually John Dawes that did it, and a man named Prescott, because Paul Revere was interdicted by the British troops. But they were bringing a message from Dr. Warren and the committees of correspondence and the committees of safety in Boston to tell them, looks like the British are mounted troops here, and we're not exactly sure what they're trying to do. They're probably going to go after the munitions that are in Concord, but they're probably going to try to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock and either send them back to England in chains or shoot them right there or something. And basically, when the British came, it was obvious that they had some bad plan. The Minutemen, the militia, the regulated militia, did not want to engage the British troops in a fight.
And so these men stood their ground when they were told, you are to drop your weapons and disband. Well, they started to disband, but they would not drop their weapons because they were militia, And what happened when they started to disband, they got fired on. The first shot that was fired by the British regulars. It was not fired by the Minutemen. It was not fired by the colonists. It was not fired by the people of Lexington. And we can find that in the narrative of Jonas Clark, the pastor. 8 of them got shot and killed. Many were bayoneted. Some died later of wounds. Many were wounded. But 8 died on this green. But they stopped the British as they were on their march to Concord. And they did what was right. This was a principled stand for freedom, and we're doing the same thing today.
We will not obey orders to disarm the American people.
I will not obey.
Well, today we're here on the green at Lexington, April 19th, which is the anniversary of April 19th, 1775, which was the first shot and fire of the American Revolution. I'm Stuart Rhodes, the founder of Oath Keepers, which is a non-partisan association of current serving military, police, and veterans, all of us who swore an oath to defend the Constitution. And our mission is to make sure that all of the other oath takers are oath keepers.
Gun confiscation is exactly what happened during the state of emergency following Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. U.S. troops also arrived, something far easier to do even now thanks to last year's elimination of the 1878 Posse Comitatus Act. That forbid U.S. troops from policing on American soil.
We've had critics that say, well, what are you guys talking about? Of course I'm going to keep my oath. I find it offensive that you even suggest that a military officer or a police officer would not keep the oath. And we say, hey, we got one word for you, Katrina. Okay? Look at what happened there. And so we want to make sure there are no more Katrinas. We don't want any more of that. What we're hearing is that a lot of those guys just weren't prepared for those orders and hadn't thought about it ahead of time. Then we have Lieutenant Commander Cunningham, Guy Cunningham, who was the author of the 29 Palms survey that was done back in 1995. Well, he surveyed the Marine Corps, some Marines at 29 Palms, and asked them whether or not they would fire on Americans who resisted in an attempt to disarm them. If orders came down to disarm the American people and they resisted, would they fire on them? So
the 29 Palms survey, ending with question 46, with the scenario that the government has banned all non-sporting firearms and that the American citizens in possession of these firearms have 30 days to turn them over to the local authorities. At the end of this period of time, several citizen groups form that refuse or resist the confiscation of these firearms banned by the U.S. government. Marines were asked whether or not they would fire upon U.S. citizens who refuse or resist the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government. I found this very difficult to swallow. 11% opted with the no opinion response. Had no opinion? Firing on their own fellow Americans? Of the remaining 26.34% answered that they would fire on their fellow Americans, U.S. citizens, who refused or resisted the confiscation of firearms banned by the U.S. government, who had no authority constitutionally to enact such a ban.
My name is Sergeant Charles Dyer. I'm an Oath Keeper. I'm with the 1st Light Armored Reconnaissance Battalion out of Camp Pendleton, California. I absolutely could not, I can't imagine that we're living in the times where I have to worry about having to confiscate the weapons from the American people. Is that freedom? It's absolutely not freedom. That I have to worry that we're going to quarantine a city for the purposes of keeping them in their hostage, like Katrina? Absolutely not. That's not freedom in any way that you can think of it. I'm almost speechless whenever I try to talk about this because I can't imagine that we're living in this kind of time. It really bothers me. Absolutely.
Because of the quotation March 11th, 1993 by President Clinton, because of the Clinton assault weapons ban that was being enacted, I formed a scenario that I knew would be explosive shouldn't have been, but because of the times and the machinations of certain forces to disarm the American people.
I don't care whether it's your governor or your senator or your representative or your president. I'm sure you can look at instances, days within having sworn his oath, the person violates it blatantly. That's a dangerous thing.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
None of this stuff would be happening if it had stuck with the Constitution and stuck within its parameters.
And we learned the American dream, and we were out there doing that American dream and working, and we were electing representatives that we felt were going to represent us while we were doing other things and maintaining our families and raising our families and doing the right thing as we thought. And I think we were duped in some cases where they've actually let us down.
I saw a tremendous pattern of the growth of the infrastructure of a totalitarian state in the last 8 years post 9/11. I mean, it's been going on for decades. We've seen for decades encroachments on our liberties, and then a crisis would come along, and then all of a sudden they had a chance to get their policies passed they've been wanting to pass for a long time. That's what I saw as just incredibly alarming. And it's just the concept of enemy combatant status itself is an extension of that. And when I was writing at Yale, I wrote a paper on enemy combatant status. It won their award for best paper on the Bill of Rights. And unfortunately, when Obama was elected, he didn't repeal any of those things. And he's left that in place, which is the pattern of all presidents. Whether it's a left boot or a right boot on the back of your neck, we just don't want the boot on the back of our neck.
He stands on that office on the condition of that oath, and the safety valve that he takes is refusing to violate it.
When you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, you took upon yourself an individual obligation to make your own decision on the spot of where that line is and whether an order is lawful or unlawful. You have an obligation to do so, and as the Nazis found out at Nuremberg, just following orders is no excuse.
95% of the church, Christian church, supported Hitler, which is terrifying to me. And so I think we need to really wake up and not assume that our fellow citizens won't hurt us.
I would say to any pastor or anyone in the military, should we have a breakdown in things in this country, stay by your Bible and stay by the Constitution. Do those things. And remember that in the history of this world, the terrible debacle, from my perspective anyway, of what happened in Nazi Germany, when the church did not stand by those innocent people, the Jewish people who were exterminated for no other reason than being Jewish.
My God, how did we ever allow our government to reach such a point?
What's happening to the United States is very, very sad. It's sad because we've seen it done to third world nations over and over and over again.
I would like to ask that all of you just take a moment, take a deep breath, and realize the solemn nature of this occasion, because those of you who so choose will be swearing an oath. Pretty serious proposition.
You'll never have anything in your life that's as valuable as your word. So just remember that. If we all do nothing more than fulfill our oath, then we can turn things around just on that alone.
Because it only takes a few relatively faithful servants to diffuse a lot of mischief in times of crisis, if they merely hold to their oath.
If you can't swear that oath, please mentally excuse yourself and don't participate, because I, for one, intend to honor this oath, because we're in perilous times. Not quite so perilous, or perhaps far more perilous than in 1775. Please raise your hand thusly, and when you hear me say "I," pronounce your own name. I, Larry Bailey, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely. Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. pledging my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. So help me God. Welcome, my brothers and sisters, to our great fraternity.
Oath Keepers, an association of active duty military, police officers, and veterans, all of us who swore the oath and will keep our oath, and will honor our oath. If you swore an oath to defend the Constitution, honor your oath by joining us, the Oath Keepers, and become an Oath Keeper.
It was here in the early days of the Republic that Hamilton and Jefferson debated how best to administer a young economy and ensure that our nation rewarded the talents and drive of its people. And 2 centuries later, we still grapple with these questions, questions made more acute in moments of crisis. And it was 1 year ago today that we experienced just such a crisis. Several of the world's largest and oldest financial institutions had fallen, either bankrupt, bought, or bailed out. $5 trillion of Americans' household wealth evaporated in the span of just 3 months. So yes, we had to take extraordinary action in the wake of an extraordinary economic crisis. Ironically, led to a rescue far more intrusive than anything any of us, Democratic or Republican, progressive or conservative, would have ever proposed or predicted. Now, there will be those who defend the status quo. There always are. There will be those who argue we should do less or nothing at all. There will be those who engage in revisionist history or have selective memories and don't seem to recall what we just went through last year. So I want everybody here to hear my words. Essential to this effort is reforming what's broken in the global financial system. This administration is committed to pursuing expanded trade and new trade agreements. And each time that we have met with the G20 and the G8, we have reaffirmed the need to fight against protectionism. So I promise you, I did not run for president to bail out banks or intervene in capital markets. But it is important to note that the very absence of common sense regulations able to keep up with a fast-paced financial sector is what created the need for that extraordinary intervention. Not just with our administration, but the previous administration. And this administration, under the outstanding leadership of Tim Geithner and Larry Summers and others, they were not the cause of this crisis. And yet American taxpayers, through their government, had to take extraordinary action to stabilize the financial industry. They shouldered the burden of the bailout, and they are still bearing the burden of the fallout in lost jobs and lost homes and lost opportunities. 1 year ago, we saw in stark relief how markets can spin out of control, how a lack of common sense rules can lead to excess and abuse, how close we can come to the brink.